February 1959. 9 experienced Soviet hikers walked into the Ural Mountains. What searchers found weeks later defied every logical explanation. Bodies scattered across frozen slopes. A tent slashed from the inside. Injuries so severe, medical examiners compared them to car crashes. And missing body parts that still haunt investigators today. This is the Dyatlov Pass Incident, and what really happened on that mountain will challenge everything you think you know about unexplained deaths. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 2,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these histories matter. The story begins with ambition and expertise. January 27, 1959. 10 members of the Ural Polytechnic Institute gathered for what should have been a routine expedition. Their destination, Oterten Mountain, deep in the northern Urals. Leading them was Igor Dyatlov, 23 years old, brilliant and seasoned beyond his years. His team represented the best the Institute had to offer. 8 men, 2 women, all expert skiers who had conquered difficult routes before. This was supposed to be a certification trek, nothing they had not handled dozens of times. But before they even reached the mountains, fate intervened. Yuri Yudin fell ill. The decision was made quickly. He would turn back. The others pressed forward, 9 souls continuing into the wilderness while Yudin returned to civilization. He could not have known he was the only one who would ever leave those mountains alive. The journey started unremarkably. The group moved through snow and wind with practiced efficiency. They documented everything, taking photographs, writing in journals, maintaining the careful records expected of their academic training. Their planned route would push them through some of the most isolated terrain in the Soviet Union. But these were not novices stumbling into danger. They knew the risks. They had prepared for them. Days passed. The landscape grew harsher. The temperatures dropped. But the group maintained their pace. By February 1st, they had reached the slopes of Kholat Syakhl. The name itself should have been an omen. In the language of the indigenous Mansi people, it translates directly to Dead Mountain. But names are just words. And the team had work to do. Visibility had deteriorated throughout the day. Weather conditions suggested they may have drifted slightly off their intended course. Still nothing catastrophic, nothing that would explain what came next. They established camp on the mountainside. The slope was not particularly steep, perhaps 30 degrees. Experienced mountaineers would barely register it as a hazard. The tent went up, supplies were organized, and as darkness fell across the Urals, 9 people settled in for another cold night in the wilderness. What happened in the hours that followed remains one of the most analyzed mysteries of the 20th century. 26 days later, searchers found the tent still standing on that slope. But something was catastrophically wrong. The canvas had been slashed open from the inside. Not a small tear, not damage from wind or animal. Long, deliberate cuts made by people desperate to escape, and they had escaped, fleeing into temperatures hovering between -25 and -30 degrees Celsius. The footprints told a story that made no sense. Some barefoot, some in socks, heading downhill toward the tree line. These were not the actions of rational people making calculated decisions. This was panic. This was terror, But terror of what? The searchers followed the trail, 1,500 meters from the tent, near a cedar tree at the forest edge. They made their first discovery: two bodies. Yuri Krivonyshenko and Yuri Doroshenko, found on February 27th. Both wore only underwear. The cold had killed them, hypothermia shutting down their bodies while they huddled near the remnants of a small fire. Above them, the cedar branches showed damage up to 5 meters high. Someone had climbed that tree. Someone had been looking for something, or watching for something. The same day, another body, Igor Dyatlov himself, positioned between the forest and the tent. His body language frozen in time suggested he had been trying to return to camp. Hypothermia claimed him too, but his placement raised questions. Why separate? Why was he alone? Early March brought two more discoveries along the same route back toward the tent. Zenaida Kolmogorova and Rustem Slobodin. Slobodin bore a small skull fracture, though not severe enough to have killed him. Both succumbed to the cold. 5 bodies recovered, 4 still missing, and then winter tightened its grip again, and the search had to pause. May 4th, nearly 3 months after that fateful night, the snow finally began to melt, and searchers returned to the area. What they found in a ravine 75 meters from the cedar tree would transform this tragedy into an enduring enigma. 4 bodies, lying in running water beneath 4 meters of snow. And the autopsy reports on these final victims revealed something that should have been impossible. Lyudmila Dubinina's chest was crushed, massive fractures consistent with extreme force. Her tongue was missing, her eyes were gone. Part of her upper lip had been removed. Alexander Zolotaryov showed similar devastating chest trauma. His eyes were also missing. Semyon Zolotaryov and Nikolai Thibault Brignol displayed significant injuries. Thibault Brignol had major skull damage. The medical examiner's report used language that stopped investigators cold. The force required to cause these injuries was comparable to a high-speed car accident, yet there were no external wounds, no soft tissue damage that would normally accompany such catastrophic internal trauma. And then came the detail that launched 1,000 conspiracy theories. Some of the recovered clothing showed traces of radioactive contamination, low levels but present, measurable, unexplained. For over 60 years, theories have multiplied like shadows. Military weapons testing. The radiation seemed to point that direction, except the levels detected were inconsistent and relatively minor. Some of the victims worked with radioactive materials in their university studies. A mundane explanation for an extraordinary detail. No evidence of military operations in that specific location at that time has ever surfaced despite decades of scrutiny. The Mansi people faced suspicion early. Could the indigenous population have attacked the group? The theory collapsed under the weight of its own assumptions. The Mansi had no motive. The area held no sacred significance worth killing to defend. Most critically, the footprints leaving the tent belonged exclusively to the 9 hikers. No one else had been there. On infrasound became a popular explanation. The theory proposed that wind conditions created low-frequency sound waves that triggered irrational panic and fear. While infrasound can cause discomfort, there is zero evidence it could generate the specific terror needed to make experienced mountaineers flee into lethal conditions wearing almost nothing. More importantly, Infrasound cannot explain crushed rib cages and fractured skulls, but one theory refused to die, despite being dismissed for decades. Avalanche. The slope seemed too gentle. The evidence seemed wrong. Until 2021, when researchers from Swiss and Russian institutions published something remarkable. Using modern computer modeling and updated avalanche dynamics, they proposed a scenario that had been hiding in plain sight all along: a delayed slab avalanche. Small, localized, triggered hours after the tent was pitched. The slope angle of approximately 30 degrees, combined with specific wind conditions and the way the team had dug the tent into the snow, created a perfect recipe for a snow slab collapse. Not a massive avalanche. Something smaller. Something that could strike while people slept, causing injury and panic without burying the entire camp. The hikers, woken suddenly, possibly already hurt, made the only decision that made sense in that moment. They cut their way out of the tent and fled downhill. This is standard avalanche protocol. You move away from the danger zone. You wait. You return when it is safe. They reached the tree line and lit a fire for warmth. Some attempted to climb the cedar to assess whether returning to the tent was possible, and others tried to make the journey back for supplies, but the cold was faster than their plans. 5 died from hypothermia before they could execute their survival strategy, and the final 4, seeking shelter in the ravine, either fell in darkness and poor visibility or were caught by a second, smaller snow collapse into the ravine itself. The crushing injuries match what falling into a rocky ravine under snow would produce. The missing soft tissues, tongue, eyes, lips, are completely consistent with 3 months of decomposition in running water. These are the first tissues targeted by natural decay and scavenging in aquatic environments. Medical examiners in 1959 did not have the extensive decomposition research we possess today. Here is my perspective, and I do not offer this lightly. We want mystery to match tragedy. We want 9 deaths to mean something beyond bad luck and worse timing. But nature does not care about narrative satisfaction. The evidence, examined without the need for exotic explanations, points to a terrible accident, a rare avalanche scenario on a slope that seems safe, a series of decisions made under stress and injury that led to hypothermia deaths, and decomposition processes that appeared mysterious only because investigators in 1959 lacked the knowledge base we now possess. The Soviet investigation concluded with vague language about an unknown compelling force because they could not explain what they were seeing. Files were sealed, fueling decades of speculation. But sealed files do not equal conspiracy. They equal bureaucratic reflex in a government that did not like admitting it could not solve problems. The Dyatlov Pass Incident endures because it strikes at something primal. 9 experienced people died in circumstances that seemed impossible to explain. We found bodies in positions that told stories we could not initially understand. We discovered injuries that appeared to defy natural causes. But modern science, patient analysis, and accumulated knowledge have provided answers that fit the evidence without requiring military experiments, hostile forces, or phenomena beyond nature. In 2019, Russian authorities reopened the investigation and supported the avalanche theory while acknowledging we cannot reconstruct every single detail of that night. For the families, Perhaps the truth they needed most was always the simplest. 9 young people died in a catastrophic accident in one of the harshest environments on Earth. The mountain does not keep secrets. We simply were not asking the right questions for 60 years. What do you think? Does the avalanche theory satisfy the evidence, or are there details that still trouble you? Drop your perspective in the comments because this conversation matters. If this investigation into one of history's most analyzed mysteries gave you new understanding, hit that like button right now. Subscribe and turn on notifications because we are just getting started on untold stories and unsolved cases that deserve this level of scrutiny. Share this with someone who loves mysteries that actually have answers. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next investigation.